My shoulder was pressed against the cold drywall of my own brother's hallway while his wife dug her acrylic nails into my forearm and whispered that if I didn't leave through the back door right now, she would call the police. "Look at you, Thomas," Brenda hissed, her grip tightening until I felt the skin twist. "You're pathetic. You smell like dust. You live in a shoebox. And you are going to ruin Mark's one chance at this promotion just by letting Arthur Vance see your face. Get out." I was 68 years old. My left knee contained a titanium joint that ached whenever the barometer dropped, and I was wearing a charcoal wool coat I'd purchased at a Sears liquidation sale in 2011. I was holding a plastic container of store-bought dinner rolls that I had been instructed to bring through the service entrance. I didn't pull my arm away. I didn't look at the back door. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, and I smiled, just a fraction of an inch. She thought I was smiling because my mind was finally slipping. She had no idea that the billionaire currently sitting in her dining room, the man her husband had spent 11 months trying to impress, still had my private number saved in his phone under a single word: boss. But I need to go back. Let me tell you how a 68-year-old man ended up backed against a wall in a $1.4 million house, waiting to detonate a life. My life was small by design. Every morning at 5:15 a.m., I walked 3 blocks from my apartment to O'Rourke's Diner on 4th Street. Booth 6, black coffee, 2 eggs over easy. Maria, the owner, hadn't handed me a menu since 2018. I left a $5 tip under the saucer, walked home, watered the single African violet on my windowsill, and read the physical newspaper. I lived in 600 square feet above a hardware store in Oak Park. The floor slanted toward the radiator. The hot water took 3 minutes to reach the tap. It was exactly what I wanted. I was alone because October 12, 2016, took the only thing that mattered. Claire, pancreatic cancer. 41 days from the ultrasound to the empty room. She died on a Tuesday at 3:14 p.m., holding my left hand so tightly that my knuckles ached for a week. Before the monitor flatlined, she pulled me down to her mouth. "Leave the war, Tommy," she whispered. Her breath smelled like copper and mint. "Let them have the money. Just be quiet. Be quiet for me." I kept that promise. For 22 years before that Tuesday, I wasn't Thomas the quiet widower. I was Thomas Sterling, founder and senior managing partner of Sterling Capital. I was a corporate liquidator. I bought failing companies, mapped their rot, excised the infection, and sold the bones. I interrogated ledgers. I broke executives who thought they could hide money in shell structures. I did it quietly, surgically, and without mercy. When Claire died, I walked away. I placed my voting shares, 51% of $4 billion equity fund, into a blind trust. I surrendered my board seats. I kept a $2,400 monthly annuity and gave the rest to the foundations we built in her name. I became nobody, because being somebody had cost me the time I should have spent with her. I didn't expect to survive the grief, but then Brenda arrived. My brother Mark married Brenda 3 years before Claire died. She was 15 years younger than Mark, sharp-edged, ambitious. But in the weeks after Claire's funeral, Brenda was the one who showed up at the hardware store apartment. She arrived on a freezing November Thursday carrying a glass casserole dish. "Baked ziti." The foil was still hot. "You need to eat, Tommy," she said. She scrubbed my baseboards. She organized a mountain of medical bills into 3 neat stacks. One afternoon, I fell asleep in the armchair holding Claire's scarf. I woke up 2 hours later. Brenda had draped a wool blanket over my knees and was sitting at the kitchen table, quietly reading a magazine in the dark, so she wouldn't wake me. I loved her for that. I trusted her. That trust was the first brick in a wall I didn't see being built. The shift didn't happen overnight. It started when Mark got a mid-level management job at Vance Enterprises. The salary bumped. The cars changed. A Honda became an Audi. The Audi became a Porsche Macan. They bought the house in Highland Park, 5,400 square feet. Pillars, a driveway that circled a dead fountain. And as their altitude increased, my presence became a weight. It started with the invitations. "Tommy, we're having people over Friday, but it's Mark's work friends. Very corporate. You'd probably be bored. Maybe come by Sunday instead. I said yes. It sounded reasonable. Then came the driveway. I drove a 2004 Corolla with a rusted rear quarter panel. Brenda called me before my nephew's birthday party. Tommy, the caterers need the driveway clear. Do you mind parking on Elm Street and walking up? It's just 2 blocks. I parked on Elm. I walked in the rain. I told myself this is what family does to accommodate each other. Then Mark stopped answering his phone. I'd call on a Tuesday to see how his cholesterol test went. Voicemail. I'd call on a Saturday. Voicemail. Brenda would text me 3 hours later. Mark swamped with Q3 projections, Tommy. He says, hi. One by one, the threads connecting me and my brother were being cut by a very sharp, very patient pair of scissors. But I didn't see the full architecture until the second week of November. I was at their house to fix a leaking P-trap under the guest bathroom sink. Brenda had called me because plumbers cost $150 an hour and my time was free. I finished the pipe. I washed my hands. I walked down the hall to Mark's study to tell him I was leaving. The room was empty, but his Vance Enterprises laptop was open on the mahogany desk. I didn't mean to look, but the screen was glowing and the document was maximized. It was an approved vendor invoice, $24,500 for logistical consulting, paid to a company called Crescent Supply, LLC. Something behind my ribs went perfectly still. The part of my brain that I had put to sleep in 2016, the apex predator that hunted discrepancies in corporate ledgers, opened its eyes. I recognized the name. Crescent Supply wasn't a logistics firm. It was an off-the-shelf Delaware shell company. The kind of structure you buy for $800 online when you need an entity to receive funds without listing a beneficiary. I walked out of the house. I drove back to Oak Park. I didn't turn on the radio. That night, at 11:40 p.m., I pulled a heavy metal lockbox from under my bed. I entered the 8-digit code. I took out a black laptop I hadn't charged in 7 years. It booted up. I routed my connection through 3 virtual networks and accessed the Delaware corporate registry. I pulled the incorporation documents for Crescent Supply, LLC. Registered agent Brenda Mumford. Her maiden name. Date of incorporation, March 14th. 2 weeks before Mark's division at Vance Enterprises started showing record expenditure spikes. I sat at my small kitchen table and went to work. For hours, I mapped the entire operation. Mark was authorizing phantom invoices from his department. Brenda was receiving the funds through the shell company and funneling them into 3 separate accounts to avoid the $10,000 banking alert thresholds. There were 31 payments. The total was $412,800. I leaned back in the chair. The radiator clanked in the corner. My hands were perfectly steady. The woman who had baked me ziti and covered me with a blanket had been using my brother to steal nearly $500,000 from a company owned by my own blind trust. I closed the laptop. I didn't call the police. I waited. The mask slipped entirely 4 days before Thanksgiving. Brenda came to my apartment. She didn't knock. She used a spare key I'd given her for emergencies. She set a plastic dry cleaning bag on my table. What's this? I asked. It's a suit, Tommy, from the Goodwill in Evanston. I had it cleaned. She wouldn't look at my face. She looked at the wall, the window, the floor. Arthur Vance is coming to Thanksgiving dinner. Mark finally got him to accept an invitation. It's the final test before the VP promotion. I have a suit, Brenda. Your suit is shiny at the elbows, Tommy. Her voice dropped half a register. The sweetness evaporated. Arthur Vance is worth $3 billion. I cannot have you sitting at my table looking like a vagrant. Wear this, and please let Mark do the talking. I looked at the plastic bag. I saw the entire structure. I'll bring the rolls, I said. Fine. Use the side door. The caterers will be in the kitchen. She left. I touched the cheap polyester of the suit through the plastic. I thought about Claire. I thought about the promise I made. Just this once, Claire, I whispered to the empty room. Let me go back. Just for one day. Thanksgiving afternoon. 38 degrees and sleeting. I parked the Corolla 2 blocks away on Elm Street. I walked through the freezing rain, carrying the $4 tray of dinner rolls. I wore my 2011 Sears coat. I did exactly as I was told. I went to the side door. I stepped into the mudroom. The house smelled like roasted sage, expensive Pinot Noir, and panic. Brenda intercepted me before my boots hit the hardwood. Her eyes were manic. "What are you doing here now?" she hissed. "It's 4 p.m. Dinner's at 4:30. Arthur arrived early. He's in the dining room with Mark." She grabbed my forearm. Her acrylic nails bit into my skin through the wool. "You're not going in there. Give me those." She snatched the rolls out of my hands. "Wait in the laundry room. I'll bring you a plate when they're done." "I'm going to sit with my brother," I said quietly. That was when the nail dug deeper. That was when she pushed me back against the drywall of the hallway. "Look at you, Thomas. You're pathetic. You smell like dust. You live in a shoebox. And you are going to ruin Mark's one chance at this promotion just by letting Arthur Vance see your face. Get out." I looked at her hand. I felt the 4 oval bruises beginning to form under the wool. My jaw set. I felt my back teeth meet. And something inside me that had been dormant for 8 years locked into place with a heavy, satisfying click of a vault door closing. "I'm not going to the laundry room, Brenda." I stepped forward. I didn't push her. I just walked through the space she was occupying, forcing her to step back. I walked down the hallway, my titanium knee clicking faintly, and turned the corner into the dining room. The table was spectacular. Crystal, silver, 14 chairs. Mark was sweating through his custom shirt, pouring wine. And sitting at the head of the table, looking bored, was Arthur Vance. Arthur was 55 now. Silver hair, tailored Italian suit. 20 years ago, he was a bankrupt software developer sitting in my office, begging me not to liquidate his firm. I didn't liquidate it. I restructured it, funded it, and mentored him. When I walked away, I made him CEO. Arthur brought his crystal wine glass to his mouth. He looked over the rim. He saw me. The glass stopped moving. He didn't swallow. He lowered the glass to the saucer. It made a sharp clink that echoed in the sudden silence of the room. Brenda rushed in behind me, breathless, her face flushed with rage. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. This is Mark's brother, Thomas. He has some cognitive issues. He gets confused. I'm taking him back to the kitchen." Arthur Vance stood up. He ignored Brenda entirely. He buttoned his suit jacket, stepped away from the head of the table, and bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said. His voice was thick, with absolute deference. The room tilted. Mark stopped pouring the wine. The bottle hovered in the air. Brenda froze, her hand still reaching for my sleeve. "Arthur," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You're looking well." "Thank you, sir. I didn't know you were in Chicago. I live in Oak Park." I looked at Mark. My brother's face had gone the color of wet ash. "Mark didn't mention it?" "Mark didn't mention your name at all, sir." Arthur turned his gaze to my brother. The billionaire's eyes were suddenly cold enough to shatter glass. "Mark told me his brother was a retired janitor." Brenda let out a sound, a short, high-pitched intake of air. "Mr. Vance, I don't... How do you know Thomas?" Arthur didn't look at her. "Thomas Sterling owns 51% of Vance Enterprises, Mrs. Mumford. I work for him." I unbuttoned my Sears coat. I folded it meticulously. I draped it over the back of the nearest chair. I walked to the head of the table, the chair Arthur had just vacated. I sat down. I looked at my brother. 31 payments, Mark." I said, the rhythm of an investigator reading findings aloud. Mark's knees gave out. He caught himself on the edge of the mahogany table, the wine bottle clattering against the wood. 31 payments, I repeated, routed through Crescent Supply, LLC, totaling $412,800, authorized by your terminal, deposited into an account registered to your wife's maiden name. Brenda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The desperation cycle began. "This is a misunderstanding," Mark stammered, his eyes darting frantically between me and Arthur. "Tommy, I can explain the vendor. You set up a shell company," I said. "We were going to pay it back." Brenda shrieked, stepping forward. "It was a temporary loan. The mortgage here is so high, and Mark's bonus didn't clear." You forge vendor invoices to steal from a blind trust. I said, you can't do this. Brenda's voice cracked, the entitlement flaring one last time before it died. You're family. You can't just ruin us. I have a daughter, Tommy, Mark whispered. Please. The room went dead silent, only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. I looked at Brenda. I looked at the woman who had brought me baked ziti when my wife died. I looked at the woman who had just told me I smelled like dust. I had the power to vaporize them. Arthur was waiting for the word. One nod, and the FBI would be at the front door in 20 minutes. Mark would do 10 years in federal prison. Brenda would be indicted for wire fraud. They would lose everything, including their daughter. I touched my thumb to the inside of my left ring finger, where Claire's ring used to rest against mine. Be quiet for me. Arthur, I said, sir, have the legal department draft a promissory note for $112,800, 6% annual interest. Mark will resign on Monday morning, citing health reasons. Yes, sir. I stood up. I looked at Mark. He was weeping silently, tears cutting tracks through the sweat on his face. The house goes on the market Tuesday, I told him. My voice was completely flat. The Porsche goes back to the dealership. You will live on what you earn at whatever job you find next. You will pay the trust $5,000 on the first of every month. If you miss a single payment by a single hour, Arthur will forward the forensic file to the FBI. Tommy, Mark choked out. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you. I said, I'm doing it because the woman I loved wouldn't want to destroy you. You did this to yourselves. I'm just the one who kept the records. I picked up my coat. I put it on. I walked past Brenda. She was staring at the floor, shivering. Her arms wrapped around herself as if the house had suddenly lost its heat. It had. I walked out the side door. I walked 2 blocks in the sleet to my Corolla. I turned the key. The engine turned over, rough but steady. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in months. Not the empty kind, the settled kind, the kind that knows it belongs here. I hung my coat on the hook. I sat in my armchair and listened to the radiator hiss. And for the first time in 3 weeks, my hands weren't tight. My brother is gone. We haven't spoken since that Thanksgiving. The silence he leaves behind is a permanent mark. Every time the phone rings, there's a fraction of a second where I hope it's him, before I remember that the man I grew up with died the day he signed that first forged invoice. I don't mind the silence. Some lessons should leave marks. Otherwise, you might forget them. On Saturday, I took the bus to St. Catherine's Memorial Garden. Row 12, Plot 4. Claire Elizabeth Sterling, 1952 to 2016. I did it right, I told the stone. The wind moved through the bare oak trees above us. I didn't destroy them. I could have, and part of me wanted to, but I kept the promise. A single yellow leaf fell onto the granite marker. I brushed it away. I stayed for another hour. That was 14 months ago. Mark and Brenda live in a 2-bedroom rental in Naperville. Mark manages a regional logistics warehouse on the night shift. Brenda works a reception desk at a dental clinic. $5,000 leaves their account on the first of every month. They have 73 months remaining. They have never missed a payment. 3 weeks ago, I went to the Kroger on Hamilton Boulevard to buy coffee. I was standing in the produce aisle, testing the firmness of a tomato, when I looked up. Brenda, end of the aisle. She was pushing a red plastic handbasket. Inside was a box of store-brand pasta and a jar of cheap tomato sauce. She was wearing a faded gray cardigan. She looked up. We made eye contact across 40 feet of scuffed linoleum. She froze. Her hand tightened on the handle of the basket. I waited to feel something. Anger, triumph, pity, vindications, anything. Nothing came. I felt nothing. Just a slight chill of the refrigerated produce section. And that, more than the promissory note, more than the look on Arthur Vance's face, more than the empty $1.4 million house, that told me it was truly over. Some people believe family means unconditional forgiveness. They believe blood demands a blank check for betrayal. Those people have never been pushed against a wall by someone they trusted, while the person they loved watched and did nothing. Mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is the thing you choose when you have the power to destroy someone, and you decide not to. But make no mistake, it is a choice. And I made it with my eyes open. I nodded to Brenda. Just once. She looked at the floor and quickly pushed her basket down the next aisle, disappearing behind a display of paper towels. I put the tomato in my bag. I paid at the register. I still go to O'Rourke's Diner at 5:15 a.m. Booth 6. Coffee black. Maria doesn't ask what I want. I still water the African violet on my windowsill. It isn't thriving, but it's alive. Claire would have opinions about the soil quality. I live in 600 square feet. The floor still slants. The hot water still takes 3 minutes. But I'm here. The door is locked. The key is mine. And every morning I take that first step, and the titanium in my knee sends this little reminder, and I think, I'm still standing. After everything, I'm still